Greetings, how are we? Welcome back. Today we are talking to one of Europe's most respected label heads. We'll be talking to one of my personal favourite DJs, and we'll get to know a little bit more about a scene that I'm sure one or two of us are a little bit in the dark about. Let me welcome to the screen immediately and jump straight in and say, good afternoon, Mad Mats. How are you, sir? You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Good to have you. Thank you. I always begin, people who watch this regularly will know that I have to start tentatively checking all of my screen to make sure that the broadcast is working, make sure that the levels are fine, because in the past I've conducted an interview and it's been silent all the way through. And that would be a little bit of a pointless exercise, wouldn't you agree?
That wouldn't be good, no.
It wouldn't be good. Okay, so Mad Mats out of Sweden. We are, as we were just talking before we began, we are going to find out how you came to run one of the most respected underground labels in Europe. There is a much bigger history for yourself than Local Talk. I'm happily sporting a T-shirt that we collaborated at the Vocal Booth Weekender a few years ago. We'll touch very briefly on that. But I want to find out about you. I'm particularly interested to find out about the scene in your neck of the woods. You have a deep history in music, and Sweden also went on to become very famous for the house sound, but not particularly a house sound that you yourself are associated with. So I'd like to touch on that very briefly at some point of the conversation. So where do we begin? Where do you feel would be a good place to start for us to tell your story?
I guess going back to my origins, to my encounters with music, which was, when I was maybe like 13, I was not necessarily into music at all. I didn't really have any reference point or anything.
Okay, so a bit sorry to interrupt you. Paint me a picture of life for you at 13 then.
I was playing football.
Okay.
That was probably my main thing. And playing football and doing some other sports as well. I mean, I was doing a lot of sports, but it was basically that. And then just by accident, the whole hip hop thing came and arrived in Stockholm. And I always said this, it's like it probably took 2 weeks and then I was deep into it. And some of my friends and it wasn't, I started breakdancing and, but then quite quickly after that, I get into all the 4 elements of hip hop. I did everything, like graffiti, even tried to MC and, but then after a while, the dancing and the DJing became the thing, and it's actually where my name came from. I was b-boying, and then I started collecting breaks and beats, and I was quite heavy into that. And my breakdancing colleagues, they were kind of joking around that I was mad on records.
Okay.
Someone down the line put on a flyer, Mad Mats.
Wonderful. So just for context, just for clarification, the year you were born and the town that you were brought up in, and tell us what it was like, because for someone like myself, quite ignorant, we have the internet now, but still fascinating to understand about the culture, back then. So I'm assuming you were born early 70s or not late 60s, no?
No, 1971. And I worked. I was brought up in a working class suburb of Stockholm, northbound, and very traditional. And I was living. You would say like there was one area with like sort of a little bit more richer people, and then on the other side there was the real low working class. We were somewhere in the middle, and I'm always been very grateful that I lived somewhere in the middle, because I kind of sucked up a little bit of both cultures, if you know what I mean. There was a very big difference between them, and I was there in the middle. But I would say very normal upbringing. Like I mentioned, a lot of sports, and then basically I would say life began with hip hop.
As it did for all of us. So, was it very technologically advanced back in the days? Was Sweden and Stockholm particularly, was it known to be cutting edge, or was it a little bit behind?
Sweden, to be honest, I'm trying to remember how it was back then. I think we were no, probably like in Sweden, there's a word that's called lagom, which means basically in the middle.
Okay.
Sweden has always been very in the middle, lagom. Like it was not in the forefront. It was not like in behind. I mean, I think now we're probably quite advanced, probably ahead in many aspects. But back then we were probably mediocre, I would say. But Sweden's always been a good place to grow up in. Maybe not the most exciting place if you compare it to New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, whatever. I mean, but what happened was, like, for example, when the hip hop thing came, all eyes was on New York. Like it was, everything was inspired by that city. Like it was, and it was. I mean, wasn't just Sweden. It was all over the world. It was such a huge cultural phenomenon that really took a hold of us, and it's that's where it started basically.
Okay, so tell me then, you got into the breakdancing, attempting to MC, your friends calling you Mad Mats because of your skills on the turntables. So then the crew expand. It's the same story I've had. The same conversation I've had.
It's not that original.
Well, it is. It was actually very original back then, because when you look back at it through rose-colored spectacles, it is easy to forget just how underground things were, relatively speaking, in the grand scheme of things, compared to the other music movements that were going out. It was huge for us, but on the global scale, to mainstream, it was quite small. Would you agree with that, or did it feel like it was your world?
No. I mean, you could definitely feel that it was something that was up and coming and getting bigger. I mean, obviously, we never would have guessed how big it would become. But it was just something that's. I mean, it's like, imagine someone discovers football and loves it, or some kind of activity. This is. But the good thing was it was such an inviting community. Like it was. I met so many friends that I still have today. Some of my best friends are still from that era. So it brought people together, and it's also formed me musically in other genres, because when you're in hip hop culture, you have you want to be the best, like it's competitive, but in a nice way. And I always been very competitive. Like it doesn't matter what I do. If I go to a club or a party or whatever, I can enjoy it, but in the back of my head, it was like, I could do this better,
Yeah. So that battle mentality from the beginning.
Of course. And battle mentality is very healthy in my opinion, because it's a driving essence of what you do. Same thing when I do a label. I just don't want to be average. I want to be the best, but the best for me is being me. It's not, I'm not trying, for example, I would never sell out or do local talk in a way that I wouldn't. Me and my partner Tooli, who I work with, we would never do anything to compromise the label's musicality. It's us. I
hear that. It's a word I use pretty much every week. Authenticity is everything to you.
It's and you can that can flower anything in my surroundings. Like authentic people. Like you, or TV shows, culture, anything. Because of the hip hop thing, authenticity is very, very important, at least to me.
Beautiful. Okay, so you touched on, you embraced everything about hip hop, and it was more than just the music. So did the crew expand, start going around the different neighborhoods, challenges and everything?
Yeah, I mean, I was part of this b-boy group called Throwdown Rockers that actually, I stopped dancing maybe around 88, 89, something like this. That's when my DJing kind of took over. But this group, Throwdown, actually continued for 10, 15 years, and they travel all over the world. I mean, some of the guys in there, I mean, I was one of the original members that started it, but then it kind of got bigger, and they're quite known in the b-boy world, and travel all over the world, or Europe, maybe I would say.
Okay.
And we done some. There's a famous b-boy battle in Stockholm, actually close to where my office is now, which is like a gym, but it used to be a discotheque back in the day. And it's a famous battle between Throwdown Rockers and IC Rockers. That is and it's actually on YouTube if you look it up.
Okay,
and you can see me there. And so the one who can get through me. That's me.
What was your signature move?
I was really good at the various forms of the windmill.
Okay.
That was my thing, I was at the time pretty good at it.
Well, the funny thing is it feels to all of us, I'm sure, it feels so recent. And yet, if you tried to do it now, you would really be in trouble, right?
No, I wouldn't do it now.
There are some famous photos of us at Vocal Booth Weekender attempting to do some floor work.
Oh, you're in good shape. Maybe you can probably pull it off.
I don't know about that. It's deceiving. Okay, so you talk then as you pull away from the touring, breakdancing, whatever, and the music starts to take control. I guess we should ask very quickly: were you quite studious? Is that the right word? Were you decent at school? Did you do well in studies? Were you forced to do well by your family?
No, it depends what you compare to, because my sister is very, very successful in her business life. She's a lawyer, very good lawyer, and she's. I'm more. I mean, I went the musical path, so it's but there's never been any judgment about it. But I was again normal in school. Went, studied 3 years after high school, did economy, decent grades, not more, but good. Mm-hmm. But then obviously music took over. It was. Me sitting in a normal job, I probably wouldn't be happy. So
okay. So what was the first income that you got then as you started to move on?
Well, when I was a teenager, I used to work in the supermarket, mm-hmm. and it's that was. And then I worked in a kindergarten for a few years, and I remember I used to go to this club in the early '90s in Stockholm called Blackness. That was a kind of famous party for black underground music in a jazz club that's still around called Fashion, and it was on a Thursday night, and we used to go there and party till 3-4 o'clock, and I used to go to this kindergarten and be there 7 o'clock destroyed.
Yeah, I relate. I relate to that. Although working with kids in that state, I don't know how you.
Actually, maybe some people might know that the club Blackness became a band called Blackness that had some hip hop R&B tracks that got big in the UK. Mm-hmm. They did covers of some R&B. I mean, they're quite well known.
Okay, I'm aware of Blackness, but I wasn't aware of that history. Okay, so tell us how you ventured. How the first rumblings of success found their way to you, and what did that mean for you?
Well, when I was breakdancing, obviously I started DJing, and then because of the hip hop, I got very interested in the sampling part. So I started collecting breaks, and that tree kind of evolved, and it became I was battling DJing. I was in the Swedish DMC championships for 2 years. So I did some scratching competition, but that was quite a quick theme. And then I started DJing at some b-boy events, some like these, we call them b-boy jams, and there were some big ones, and there were some crucial people that I met back then that influenced me a lot. And then there was a guy called Damon Frost, an American dancer that I'm still very tight with, who kind of introduced me to jazz funk, like a Kool and the Gang, some of their big tunes, and it all blew up. And then I started connecting the dots to hip hop, and then it got even more interesting. So I was like samplings, breaks, funk, hip hop, all glued together. Started DJing and it probably took a while until maybe early mid '90s until I kind of found other roots like house music.
Okay. So was the house scene a little bit late in developing in Stockholm, or was it just the fact that you yourself never got on board?
No, I remember that I heard of house music in the mid '80s. It was more of the British acid house, and it didn't really appeal to me at the time. It was too stiff, maybe, and I was really into more soulful stuff, and I wanted tunes, if you say that way. So I was really into like jazz fusion. I actually did a compilation in 91 or 92 with just Scandinavian jazz funk that we put out through Time Warp Records, the British distribution channel. So I was really into this, but house music was always around. And in Sweden, there was in the late 80s, there was a club called Bat Club that was more like, I would say a commercial take of the, we want to see what they did somewhere in the UK and do something similar, but slightly more commercial. And they kind of became all these like famous Swedish like pop producers. Words from that. Dennis Pop, if you never heard, maybe you heard of him. Like Swemix. That was
yes, definitely heard of Swemix.
Yeah, and they came from that. They were around building that club, but it was more commercial, so it didn't really appeal to me as well. And so basically, it was a hip hop promoter in Stockholm called Alex Treb, who used to do all these b-boy jams. He moved to New York, and I was in New York with my then girlfriend. I think it was maybe 2, and he took me to Sound Factory Bar.
Sorry, was that 92? Did you say?
Yeah, around 92, maybe 93. I can't actually. And he was telling me about house music, and in my head, I was thinking rave music, like on drugs, going wild, so it was okay. And then he took me to Sound Factory Bar, and Louis Vega was spinning, and it was basically me and him that were the only white people in there, and it was 80% gay. So it was kind of foreign to me, even though I thought it was really cool. And I have a really, really strong memory when I came in, because he had some kind of a breakdown, and then he did this thing, when they play an intro and they start with one speaker and then a second speaker, and then when the beat comes in, everything comes on once, and it was like hallelujah, and then after that I was hooked. I remember I went back to Stockholm and I was buying import records, house music, and it was a lot of garage, like New Jersey stuff. But
Well, let me roll you back ever so slightly, because I'm fully aware that we're not going to get the complete comprehensive story. But you did mention about compilations in 91, so that would have been before then. So why is my phone? Someone's trying to ring me. Sorry. Yeah, how did that happen? How did you get the connections with the record labels? How did they approach you to, to be involved? Let's focus on that for a little bit.
Yeah, sure. It was, this is where the connection with the people, the jazz side. Like we used to go to the UK to buy records, because in London was one of the meccas, the whole reggae scene, Giles and everything in like in the late 80s. So we started going to London maybe around 88 just to buy records.
Okay.
And then when we were there, the whole acid jazz scene was really influencing us, like Giles and Kev Beadle and all these guys. So a few years later, obviously, merged with all the hip hop thing and also the house later, but everything came together kind of around those 88 to 93, where all those sound merged. But I remember when we were in London and they were looking for certain records, and then oh, these are Swedish records. They're actually, wow. And then I started digging in Stockholm, and I found some of them, and I started selling, or trading in some cases. And I sold to Giles, I sold to Kev Beadle, some other local, or to some dealers in the UK. And then from that, I decided together with a friend to put together this compilation of Scandinavian jazz, funk, and fusion records. And it was called Behind Kungsträdgården, which is behind the King's Garden, which is a garden in Stockholm where all the immigrants used to sit and play bongos, sat in the back of the garden. Okay. And there was a track by a guy called Melvin Price who did an album called Behind Kungsträdgården, and it was on there. So we took the idea from there and and made a compilation of that theme.
So you're already rolling deep with the esteemed names on the scene there. So you're already, getting yourself known. And then the house scene, going to New York. I had put a note of asking you about the culture, the fashion, and the travel. So all that comes together as well. Football has took a back seat at this stage.
It will come back later. We can talk about that, but it definitely, it went away. I mean, if you're like 13, 14 years old, like in football, I mean, it's fun, but in the whole B-boy breakdance club, there's girls there. There's no girls in football in Sweden. In Sweden at that time, you played on gravel and you kicked the ball long, and it was super unsexy. So it's like it was a very swift and dramatic shift to more social things. If you know what I mean.
So from the DJ perspective, and let me just pause ever so briefly and say good evening to Schoolie, good evening to Black Wax and anyone else that's with us. Thanks for passing through. I'm happy that everything is working fine. So from a DJ perspective, do you feel you had much notoriety? Were you making a name for yourself, or were you still in the wings?
I mean, I would say if you internationally at that time, I was probably that guy in Sweden that had some interesting records. Okay. So DJing wise, probably not. I mean, I was DJing a lot in Sweden, like every weekend, but it was, I was always and have always been the more kind of like underground nerdy guy. So it's like, and I've never really been that keen of being the more famous guy. I can give you some example later on when the club culture kind of started blooming in Stockholm, what happened. But for me, it's a standard answer, but it's always been about the music for me. And
So let me ask you, because I will relate to that, and I know a hell of a lot of other people who will relate to it. Was there something about being in the limelight that you didn't like? You felt it took away from the focus of the music, or what was it? Was it because the sound, to be a crossover success or a bigger success, you had to compromise your music? All of those together, maybe?
Well, I mean, I would just say that music was more important. That was the main. I love going to clubs, but I love going to clubs standing in the back, all the way in the back where the bass land, and you just get it in. It wasn't me standing in the front looking at the DJ. But also back then, if you went to clubs, you didn't really see the DJ back then. They were way in booths. It wasn't the important thing wasn't to see the DJ; it was to hear the music. So it's like I saw a clip actually the other day with what's his name? New York DJ, classic one. Anyway, it doesn't matter who it was. He was saying that back then, like people were dancing, while as now they stand with their phone. This is how they dance, like it's not really dancing. And I remember I was standing in the back, but I was dancing, but more for myself. And the same thing when I was DJing, I loved to be in the back in the dark, but spreading and seeing like a crowd flow. But it wasn't about like, hey, I'm here. It was never about that. It's like obviously this has changed now. It's not for me, but, and I don't have a problem being seen. I'm not shy. Never been shy. I can be extroverted if I want to, but it's still always will take a back seat to just experience the music. That's
okay.
The number one.
So as we rolling into the mid 90s, and the scene progresses, and you mentioned the New Jersey sound that would then go to explode across Europe into the gospel sound. You've got the likes of the Winter Music Conference, which we've spoken about a lot of times on this channel. Did you ever make it across to Miami?
Yeah. I mean, we've done parties there for like 6 or 7 years straight, but for another label. We can come to that later. But basically, if we go back to the 90s, like in the mid 90s, I started mixing up my hip hop with black house and drum and bass, and I mixed everything.
Okay.
And because my friends used to say that I'm musically confused. So it's like
and how was that received for the crowds that you were playing to? Did you feel that you had a real strong niche audience, or did you feel a bit frustrated at times if what you wanted to do wasn't being received?
Frustration is the biggest driving force there is. It's what drives you to go beyond where you were before. So yeah, I think every DJ that has aspirations will be frustrated at times. I was very frustrated in the mid 90s because all this music I wanted to, obviously I was not super into getting like people screaming and like a wild crowd reaction. I wanted a deep, like, you know, we call it the pig face, you know, that's that's what I wanted, you know, like when people go like it's go down in the belly. That can be tricky in Sweden in the mid 90s. So what I did is, like, me and some friends, we decided let's do something about it. So we actually started a club in 1996. And it was called, and the good thing, there was another club that I used to play that was called the G Club in Stockholm, very legendary club that was run. The main guy was a guy called Claes Bodén, who's a like 90s and 2000 very famous club promoter. And we still go check football together, by the way. But he was running this club, and it was kind of like a trendy club, but with good music. And there was a lot of good DJs playing there, but it was kind of like the trendy people of Stockholm. I went there. It was super cool to be there. Like trendy fashion, like designers, you know, it's really cool. And so there I met this guy, Klaus, and it went on for, I can't remember when actually they quit. But in 1996, I told him we should do a proper party because I want to fuse the hip hop heads with the house heads so we can get them in the same club. And maybe have two different floors. And then we did actually it was the other guy, Adia, too. There was a really famous journalist in Stockholm called Andres Loco, who was writing pop culture, like mods, but also a lot about black music, you know, like Northern Soul and stuff like this. But he was very, very famous at the time. We brought him in as a PR thing. And together with a DJ who worked at Universal at the time. So we were like four guys. Three of us was more driving it. And then we called it Fusion. It was we did it on a Wednesday night at this really famous classic club location smack in the middle of town. And which is like, I mean, the place is rammed on the weekends, but on a Wednesday night in Stockholm, no one's ever done a party. So, and then we realized that the people that we want that would be acceptable to what we were doing, probably not the normal crowd that would go there, but students. So we went out to all the student places and bombarded with flyers. And then on the first night, we had like 800 people, and that was the least we ever had.
Okay, so what would you put the success down to? The way that you marketed or the strength of the DJs?
There was a few things. I mean, obviously, people knew of me, but the other guy, Klaus, was a well-known promoter. So when you went to press, it's one of Klaus' things. So it's like he's involved, and this guy, Mats, he's like he's real, you know, like he's kind of like on the ground. And then this journalist involved, and then the guy who also DJ, but from Universal. Also, it was kind of all dots connecting in a good way. And I think we're probably a bit lucky because his timing was just right. Like drum and bass was coming as well. Like to Stockholm, it was a good time to do something underground because it was definitely, though it was in the middle of the posh clubbing party area, it was not commercial. It was super underground. And another factor was that it was a design duo who made the artwork, who are now quite famous in Sweden. They do restaurants and everything. It was just very well with a bit of luck put together. And,
there's no such. I always say there's no such thing as luck. You know, if it's all very cleverly thought out and all of the elements come together at the perfect time. So as it continued, did you just remain you guys, or did you start to draft in headliners?
Well, the first night it was just us, but then we booked everyone. It was Joe Closell, it was Kerr Chandler, it was all the drum and bass acts in the UK. It was the rare groove DJs from London. It was Giles. It was like we had like the main floor was like house or bigger music, like house music, could be techno as well, drum and bass, and then we had something called the jazz room, which was the small room, and there we had like hip hop DJs or like rare groove funk, even Latin DJs. Snowboy was there DJing and stuff like this. And then we had another room where that journalist played, and he was playing like modern soul and northern soul. And one time we even had Sancti Gen playing there. So it was like it was around the last Wednesday of every month, it was between 1,200 and 1,500 people.
Wow. That's amazing. So from 96, and how long did that run until?
It ran to 2000, so 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had one night when, it was still packed, but it became trendy, which is the worst thing I know. But we could see that the wrong people started showing, like normal people who wasn't really there for the music.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one night that apparently the Mexican Navy had been in Stockholm. So there was like 200 Mexican Navy guys in the club, and obviously they didn't care about the music, So I was like, after that night, I said, like, we can't stay here. We need to move it. We need to make it smaller. We need to go more underground, more deeper. We need to exclude people, not make it bigger. And this guy, Klaus, who was, he said, I'm good. I'll jump off. The other guy would jump off as well. So I took in another guy, a guy called Jesper, he was like a huge Detroit house fan, like Moody Man and that kind of route. So we moved it in 2000 to a venue in the South District of Stockholm, which now is super cool and trendy, but at the time was not trendy at all. And we moved into a jazz club there called Musa, which is a famous old school venue. And we had a meeting with the owners, and they were like super happy to have us because we were like the hippest club in town. But I told them, like, sort of, we're going to come here, you're going to have to buy a lot more sound. You're going to have to soundproof the windows so the neighbors won't complain, blah, 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 blah. But they listened, and we did it, and we moved in there. And then we were actually there for almost 11 years.
So when you stripped it back initially, what did the attendance change to at the beginning? What kind of numbers?
Venue?
At the new venue, what kind of numbers were you talking about now?
That's a much smaller club. It's around 350, like that capacity. I mean, it could be more people on a night, but it was one main small room, like a beautiful room, like my favorite room to ever play in ever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really good sound, really intimate, wooden floor jazz vibe, like really, really beautiful. And this is where, to symbolize that we're going away from fusion and more underground, we renamed it Raw Fusion, which later became a record label, which we can talk about later. But it's like we wanted to make it more raw, more underground, so fusion became Raw Fusion. Mm-hmm. And the opening night, I think we had DJ Harvey playing.
Okay. And so at this stage, you're clearly very busy. More international gigs for yourself?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like when we started fusion, we, like in the old venue, my personality got more known outside, so I started getting gigs. But then it was also somewhere here I kind of would understood that I would probably not make. I actually produced some hip hop in the early 90s, but I also knew that if you wanted to get big in the DJ scene, you probably need to produce club music, and I realized I didn't want to do this. So even like in those late 90s, I was back in my head of like, I need to start a label, so I can promote myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're in 2001, this is where I decided to start, make the Raw Fusion Club into a label.
Mm-hmm.
I did it together with, I did it the first 2 years by myself, but then I took in a partner when it got bigger. And
was that successful from the off with the?
Yeah. I remember the first release came out, and they took me out to Japan. I went with if you know Nick the Record,
mm-hmm.
He was from Brighton at the time, record dealer who I used to buy and trade records with. He took me after the first release. We went out to play in Tokyo, 2002, and I remember I went there with my then girlfriend who was pregnant at the time, and she was like sick because of the baby. It was really awkward out there. But it was like I remember it was the first time in Japan, and I absolutely loved it, and then I've been back to Japan, I don't know how many times, but I've been going frequently to
mm-hmm.
Japan, and so I have a decent name there. I mean, I've never been a huge DJ name, but I would say I've probably been more of a respected DJ name.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say.
Which is the important thing. So you say about respected DJ name. Let me ask you, and we'll spend just a couple of minutes talking about this. In the mid 90s to the back end of the 90s, there were some DJs who were starting to get a lot of notoriety in Sweden, and would go on to be bigger. Of course, not until we rolled over into the 2000s, the likes of Swedish House, Mafia would get absolutely huge. But those guys used to also be quite underground at one point, right?
I mean, Sebastian Ingrosso, one of the guys, I remember we used to do this party together with 3 other clubs, and they were called Union. That was in another classic venue in Stockholm. And I remember they came in there and they had to get brought because they were too young. But I remember they used to ask if they could stand behind the DJ booth and look and when we were DJing. Then obviously they got super big, I mean, the Ingrosso family come actually from, their dads used to run techno labels in Sweden, quite successful. One was called Loop, if I'm not mistaken. But there was also a big techno scene in Sweden, still is, But Kari Lekebusch and Adam Beyer, maybe you heard of, that was huge. Not really my thing. I play some techno too, I mean, I don't discriminate if it's deep and dark. I can like it, but they obviously defined the Swedish sound, and then Swedish House Mafia came into that. But I was never a part of that, really. It's like it was never me. I was.
You were more underground back. Well, you say you're turning your nose up at 1,200 people at a club, saying no, thank you. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, we had Laurent Garnier and these kind of who played more electronic and techno, but it was always more deeper and with some kind of musicality in it. And we always said we like, because of we came from hip hop, it's we liked African American rhythms, and then with today's rhythm, drum and bass, where it wasn't the hard technological drum and bass, it was the more musical, DJ Crust, Ronnie Size, all that stuff.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because it must have created a divide in the scene, and you would have seen. So that would have given you your niche as the Swedish sound, so to speak, went mainstream. That would have enabled you to stay in your lane and stay really respected and stay on the underground, right? Did you notice that you were still getting a lot of house tourists coming in and thinking, what's this music? This isn't what I wanted to hear.
No, not really. I mean, we never had any issues with. Do you remember there was a Swedish house label called Svek, SVEK?
No.
That was, and these were techno. It was a French guy called Stefan Grieder, who was or Swiss, sorry, but he started this tech or deep house tech label, which made the techno people discover stuff that wasn't so hard. And then they those people we did Svek nights at the club, but we learned we could kind of help them get into more deeper stuff, and a good example is Marcus Enochson, who was originally from techno. And then he has a very particular story with his dad, who's used to produce some famous music or people like James Ingram. But I
was just about to say, I only saw on the sleeve notes the other day that he actually wrote "Lean on Me." I was with Masters at Work. I literally found that out about 4 days ago.
But he was kind of one of the guys that came more from the techno and then started going to our parties, And for example, there are other techno people like Ariel Brika lived in Stockholm and who's now a big techno name, It's but they used to go to Fusion and experience Joe Clausel or whatever we brought over. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is the one thing that I'm really proud of. I don't think Stockholm would have had so many soulful house DJs that at the time if we didn't have the club. I mean, I always say the best way to experience club music is in the club. That's where you get influenced. That's how for me anyway. And then for 10 years from 2000, the techno scene was bigger, but the soulful house scene was big. There was, we did the Fusion Club actually outside. We did we leased it out to smaller clubs around Stockholm in small cities. We had Kennebabian in a student town down in the south of Sweden, in a small town called Lund. like he was playing live there, you know, like, and we did it in another student town with Susu Bobian up in Uppsala student city, you know, like it was blooming. But then when we started, the club ended in 2011, it kind of Berlin took over, and you know, it's like, and I wasn't really DJing as much as I was before. I played abroad.
Well, it's
I went to you guys.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that the trajectory of the sound. So earlier on, you mentioned about Miami. Where does that fall into the story?
Well, I have a really good friend in New York, a guy called DJ Scribe, Ben, who he was in Stockholm. Let me see, 2002, and he had a Swedish girlfriend, and he heard about another label I had that we can't really talk about, but and also about the Raw Fusion label, and he called me and wanted to buy some records directly from me. So I met him in the subway. He bought one record, and then we kept in contact. And when I went to New York, I used to stay with him, which I still do when I go there. And then he started talking about, you should come to Winter Music Conference. It's the shit, you know, like. So I think the first time we probably went there was 2004, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe something like this. And the first year, Marcus Engson was there with us as well. And then the next year, we did a Raw Fusion party at this place called Jazzid, a jazz club on Karlsson Avenue, where a lot of people done parties as well. And then I think we did it there for like 4 or 5 years straight, you know, like I think the last year we was there in 2010. And then some amazing parties there, really, really good ones with, you know, we had Charisma, Geology, everyone was playing, you know, like it was... I'd
like to say I was at one of them, but my memories of Miami are pretty non-existent after sort of like 97, 98. All the rest are just like a blur of alcohol.
It's been that way for me as well. But it was if you're living in Sweden, end of March, you just want to escape, and Miami was quite appealing.
Yeah,
and
initially.
But I remember what happened, like when the Ultra Festival came. It got destroyed. So then we couldn't. I think it's actually pretty sad what they've done to it. You know, like that it went away. You know, like it was such a. I love the community, and I remember like some of these smaller house parties. You know, with all the dancers, and then you can, you know, on a daytime go on Collins Avenue, some hotel, and then there's, you know, Kenny Dope spinning for like 200 people in a hotel lobby or something. It was fucking beautiful.
Yeah, incredible memories, really good memories. So I'm keen to find out then more about your relationships with other DJs in the UK and around the world, because I am unashamed in saying that I feel I was late getting on the Mad Matt's train, so to speak, before obviously Local Talk. You were getting to spin at some quite highly esteemed parties. You mentioned Kev Beadle, you mentioned Giles. Were you getting to do lots of swaps at parties or being involved? Because I know you're highly respected by some of the biggest names.
Interesting you brought that up. Like DJ swaps was quite common. Like you have a club, you book someone, they will book you back at their club or whatever. I mean, when you played around Europe, or if you played in some party in Ireland, you would probably book them back to your party. Maybe not as the headline, but we have different floors, you know. So it's that was a good way of getting around. But I was like, I would say from 97 to 2014, 15, you know, I was DJing more or less every week, you know, and going abroad. But I was, you know, I was never the headline. I mean, I could be the headline, but then the club was small, you know, like I was more the guy that the promoter knew. The crowd didn't know me.
Yeah. I completely relate to that until, which will bring me on to talking more about some of your successful productions down the years. What would you say one of your the early successes would have been that got you into places that probably you weren't expecting?
You mean releases that I've done?
Yeah, no, your actual own productions yourself that you had a hand in.
I only produced in the early 91, I had a hip hop group called Boogaloo that was released in Sweden and Japan only. I mean, it was kind of Tribe Called Quest hip hop ish. But that's the only production that I've done, except for a few edits that I've done under the radar. But it's like I wouldn't call that production. But I've released other people's music, not
of course, and quite prolifically. I can't even talk today. Okay, so then you're so busy, and at this point, it's a full-time job.
Yeah. I mean,
into sort of like the mid early 2000s. Then
I would say that from mid 90s until today, I live off music, and I have a sidekick now, which is a football coach in Sweden, which is I mentioned I was going to bring that back, so this is what I live from now and have been. So basically, I've never had a normal job, and I'm very happy with I'm content.
When you work doing something that you love, it's not really classed as work, is it? So, but it is. It hasn't all been easy, surely. I mean, when you think over the last 10 years, 15 years, there's been some highs and some extreme lows, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we started that label Raw Fusion, which was very successful, it was we had some big releases out there that did really well. This is when vinyl was still selling, you know. I mean, like we did initial prints of 4,000 to 5,000 copies, you know, and sold, and then you make money. So it's like and then leaning toward 2010, vinyl and digital hasn't really come. This is where the shift towards local talk came, because I decided, I was also closing down the club in 2011.
What was the decision for that?
Actually, we were supposed probably to go on, but they were going to have a summer break at the venue to change. They were going to rebuild something, and then we were going to open again in the autumn. And then for some reason, it just fell out, and we didn't do it. It's like we didn't restart. And then that venue kind of lost everything after that. It's like it's a bit sad. It's more like it's a bit more of a.
So you mentioned about the vinyl. If I think back to the advent of, MP3, very early 2000s, and the rise of, for example, Track Source, you never jumped on board and started pushing things digitally?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we always been on everything that came digitally. We don't discriminate on formats. I never have. I was very early with playing Serato, as you know, I was a hardcore vinyl head, but then I had these 2 tours in Australia, and the second one killed me. It was like all 2 big record cases, a bag of 45s, and always a hustle in the customs, talking, and then and at the time there was this was called Final Scratch, which was one that was before Serato. I had it with me. I tried it at some of the gigs. It didn't work, so I was like, no, that's not going to work. And then I got back, but I was so tired of carrying records. And then another guy, a friend of mine, a DJ colleague, gave me a Serato box, and I went down to a gig in Bratislava in Slovenia, and I tried it, and it was just a bar gig, like a bar club. And I tried, wow, this is amazing, it works, and you can scratch and it doesn't jump, and it's like you can have all your MP3s there. So then I never been afraid of technology. So it's like I was like, this is really cool, and it was really comfortable to travel with it. So and then it went quite quickly with going over from vinyl to digital for me. So the digital aspect has never been a problem for me. Never super comfortable with CD players. That's the only thing until now, weirdly enough.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get to the transition into local talk from Raw Fusion. So what was the decision to stop did the label stop then in 2009? Was it 2010?
9, 10, something like this. I think it was 2010.
Was that decision based on sales, energy between the working relationship?
I mean, it was still selling. We were still making money, but it was like, it was the main income was vinyl, and vinyl sales were going down. It was like it was if you compare it to the previous sales, it was a downer to look at the statements.
And it's very. Did you find there was a responsibility to the artist that you were signing who expected, because when a record label is highly respected and an artist gives you a track in good faith, when you give them the statements, they're just like, really? Is that it? Did you feel that sometimes?
I guess I've been lucky, but most of the artists, they're quite in the loop and they've been very humble. You know, I mean, we have worked with some bigger names, but then it's mainly been like remix work. But like the artists that we had, we actually created our own artists, both on local and on Raw Fusion. So I've been lucky that they've been quite humble. So I never really had that issue, or at least to my subjective interpretation. They've been all been quite cool. I mean, it's just, they realize it's a small world. We're not a big label, like big. We're not defected or anything like this. You know, it's but like I mentioned before, a lot of people come to Local Talk because they think it has a good, a decent respect out there, and it's something that they want to release on. And then
Blackwax in the chat, he's saying an amazing history and a pedigree. Local Talk was the first and so far the only label that he sent with Julian Bendel from Bar Samba. He said it would have been a huge dream to be on that label, so he's going to keep knocking at the door and make that happen. Success stories, I guess we should ask. You mentioned Defected, some of the biggest tracks that you found that then got licensed on, that was elevated to another level? Any stories like that you can tell us on?
Yeah, I mean, if you go over them when we started Local Talk, which maybe I should begin to say what happened. Like there was a vacuum of maybe like 1 year in between the labels.
But before we go to Local Talk with Raw Fusion, because you said you had some successes, give me some of the biggest artists, and in that period, were there any huge licensing deals done?
Yeah. I mean, we've I'm trying to remember. Like, we did an album with a Brazilian group called A Bossa Elétrica, where we did like the remixes for I can't remember it was all the standard names at the time. And we did another Swedish group as well. We did and then we even did a sub label called Juggling, which was just hip hop, like kind of a lot of Dilla inspired Detroit hip hop. We had one of my favorite albums that I've ever put out was a group called Hearing Aid, which was my friend who was actually the MC at the party, a guy called, and then Damon Frost was in there, and Aaron Perry. Those two had a group called Hearing Aid. If you're out, you should look it up. It's I think it's today one of the most original hip hop albums I've ever heard. Okay. So we did everything. But then I have a brain freeze of all the artists that we put out. But
I understand. Sorry to put you on the spot.
There was like maybe 60 or 70 releases in total, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's
okay. So then 2011, Local Talk begins. Tell us how this works.
Yeah, on one of the last nights at the club, I had a guy called Tooli, DJ. He was doing some other parties, and he was there, and I kind of realized that he was a good guy to work with, and I actually contacted him maybe 6 months after the party and asked him, because I've had this idea, like I want to do a label, but it can't be, because Raw Fusion was everything. It was jazz, hip hop, Latin, techno, house. It was very, just like the club, it was very diverse, which is really fun. But we needed to do something a brand that we could work with more direct. And so I decided to do a house label. And then I talked to him because he's kind of in the house scene as well. So we had a meeting and we talked about it, and we came up with the initial idea was actually to promote local artists from Sweden, hence the name Local Talk. But then that went out the window after like the first release. The first one was a friend.
Why was that? Because they were difficult to work with, or you ran out of artists?
We did the smart move. Like we always say when people ask us how to start a label, and we always say like, have a few releases ready to go, which we did. And the good thing the distribution network was already there because of the other label. And so it was that was good. And I knew the business already. So we did a very direct approach with the label, and we said like we're gonna push the label logo in the beginning. That's the main thing, and to get it with the music, of course. But so and it turned out really well. You know, like I was actually surprised how well it went, and we kind of became a bit trendy in the house community.
Do you have any inkling, any idea as to why that happened? Was it an amalgamation of the years of the respect, or?
No, we were a bit lucky because at the time we were doing some of these early 90s house sound releases, you know, that we put out. And at the time that was very hype again, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So we, just like we was with the club in Stockholm, we were lucky with the timing, I think. So we can ride on that. Then maybe 20 releases later, we understood that we can't just do 90s house music. We need to go. And obviously, that's not all we like. We like all kinds of house music. So the tree kind of blossomed in any direction to what it's done.
So let me ask you then about some of the earlier acts that you had on. If we look back at the catalogue, the likes of, and I've had to ask you how to pronounce it, Kyodai, you Krakazat was I heard of firstly through yourself, early Apolopo working with as well.
I did one of the first releases actually, but then it was called Actual Proof.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can boast to have discovered these guys?
Well, Kyodai had probably their biggest release, to be honest, but then they were called Busfort, but it was the same guys together with a friend of ours from Mallorca, but it's basically Kyodai, but they were called Busfort, and they released on Free Range this track called District that you maybe remember.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that was the same people.
But Kyodai was first on Local Talk, so I don't know if you want to call it discover, but also the biggest artist we had on the label sales-wise has been Honey, HNNY, if you remember. Mm-hmm. He was our discovery, and he was huge for us. Like because he broke over to like even soulful people liked it, but also like the trendy house people liked it. Everyone liked it. It was very middle of the road.
So was the bootleg of the very first time, that really what elevated him, or had he already arrived before then?
I'm not sure it was a bootleg. It was an official release on Local.
Okay, sorry. It was a reworking of the very first time initially, because that was the from my broken memory. Wasn't that the second mix of an original release, and then that was like a different edit of it?
No. It was only one version. There was later. There was a remix on it, but that was 10 or 15 releases later. So the very first time was an original track that was given to us as a demo, and we put it out. That's not more complicated than that.
Okay, right. Because I'm thinking of when it had the 80s riff over the top of it.
Yeah, that was later. That came later.
So that's where my timeline is completely incorrect. Yeah. I say every time, and people will be chuckling listening to this, because I never do any research. I just like to have a little chat, like we're having a beer. So forgive my ignorance. So tell me more about Honey.
The remake of Dirty by Dirty 2, which is actually some Swedish producers from Sweden. So it's like their remix was that 80s remix version, but that was later.
Okay, so where was Honey from?
He's from Stockholm.
Okay,
he was actually a local. Mm-hmm. So he huge. You know, he was traveling all over the world, but then now he totally stopped. He's making lo-fi hip hop beats. Mm-hmm. So he stopped.
So as you were going along, you were quite happy with again, using that same word, the authenticity of the label. You didn't have to compromise what you were doing. And you were starting to get recognized then, and as you say, you became cool. So did that sit well with you? You know, the fact that you were, because sometimes people I don't like to use too much success.
I wouldn't say it bothered me, but I mean, maybe I should be thankful. It was like the most famous thing you can feel is maybe when you go to Japan, because they're so like, oh, you know, like when they're very fascinated by like everything. They're also very interested. They know everything, you know, like in Europe it's more respect, you know, like, oh yeah, you dope label, you're good, you know, like, and you can DJ, yeah, cool, you know, but it was never like, like it was in Japan. But then obviously, you know, we've done tours going around. We played, like me and Tooli played all over the world, you know, like, but still not as famous, more as respected label owners who has some kind of value.
Mm-hmm. But that must sit well with you. You would prefer that, really.
To be honest, perfect. Like I'm super afraid of being a guy that's going DJing and they expect to hear something, and I have to stand there and be some clown clapping my hands or whatever. That scares me. I'm not there.
Do you have any moments when that's happened? You've been booked by a promoter, for example, who loves the label. They don't really, they'd like one record on the label as an example, and then they'll book yourself and you come along and it's just like, actually, they haven't really done their homework on how I play. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah. Sometimes the b-boy me can go and if I don't feel like this, I can go just do a big fuck you and play hip hop. It's if I don't feel it, I don't feel it, and then I'll do something to make me feel something, which is to me the most important thing. That said, I can rock a party, any party. I think that's actually the easiest thing to do with DJing is to make people dance. The hardest thing is to make them feel.
Nice. I like that. So have you ever had an occasion where you haven't been able to make them dance?
Of course, every DJ has. As I like music to be deep and you feel it. Like if it's house music, I like, prefer deep house or deeper soulful vocal. I'm not super much into power, even though I can do it. I can totally understand why people go, but I want to go deeper because then that makes me feel. And I always said this, for deeper things or more warmer, you need to have better sound system than you need when you're just playing power, because power is just effect, it's quite easy to play music that's just with a big drop or big vocals or big drums, but if you're going to play deeper, more warmer, when you bump instead of pump, you need to have a sound system that can handle it. So if the sound system is too weak, it's really hard to play deep, warm music,
Yeah, I get you. So as the time progresses, venues get bigger and bigger, and sometimes the sound systems don't necessarily match the size of the rooms. The smaller rooms, the smaller venues. I mean, let's talk very briefly about some of the occasions that you've enjoyed at Vocal Booth. Whether you were poolside, always received by your adoring fans, and then we had the local talk evening in the little club downstairs, which was phenomenal. These are the kind of moments that you live for as a DJ, right?
I mean, thankfully, when you go to your parties, it's like do you still call it senior clubbing in the UK, or is that
no?
But I think I probably mentioned it when I done some interviews here. There's clubs in the UK where the audience are not 25; they're like our age, and it's people who had the kids are at the nest and they starting going out again, and it's like the beauty with this is actually the audience has knowledge. Mm-hmm. They've heard music, whatever their reference point is when they were younger, and now they experience it again, which is lovely because you can play tracks that people actually know. Imagine like in the early 90s and you play a salsa record, the kids never heard it, it's only the DJs that knew it. I mean, we can get a good vibe anyway, but it's always pretty cool to play to a knowledgeable crowd. Mm-hmm. So
when you say knowledgeable crowd though, you're not talking about records that they're particularly know, not contradicting you, but
they know the sound, they know the feel,
they know the sound, they know the vibe, and they trust you to give them something that is in their genre, but they might not necessarily know it. So how prolific are you DJing now, traveling wise?
Well, I actually stopped DJing just before the pandemic.
Okay,
and
I didn't realize.
I wasn't super, how should I put it, keen on traveling, to be honest, for various reasons. So the DJing kind of went away for a few years. And then actually, I just started DJing again in November and in Stockholm. And it was, there's some old school house heads that has, maybe the party in London, Soulmates. Mm-hmm. They were actually started by some Swedish guys were involved as well, like Dennis Christiansen, and who now lives in London for a long time. Together with Rap.
Is Rap one of the Rap?
Yeah, Rap is one of the guys. Yeah. But Dennis was also one of the guys. But they also started Soulmates in Stockholm because they were Swedish guys. So this has been running side to side. And now after the pandemic, one of the guys who run the guy called Saint Sebastian, really cool guy. He said they're going to start Soulmates again, and then they asked me to be the resident. And I've been asked to DJ because I still have my agent, and I said no to everything. I'm not really keen, no, I work the label and I do my football, and that's fine. And then they talked me into doing it anyway. And the good thing with it, it's strictly house dancers. It's like 80% house dancers that come down there. So you can play super, super deep, I don't have to play no Traxsource top 10 stuff, like no Luther Vandross samples with a big banging drum. I can play super deep, and it's really, for me, it's like heaven. And now they actually moved to an even bigger venue. And I mean, last time they even started bringing in guests from abroad again. So it's like, I think last time was Fred P. I mean, and it was beautiful. And then me and Tooli actually started DJing abroad again. We were in Berlin this summer DJing. So it's slowly but surely I'm getting like.
So the reason I ask you was to get a handle on what the clubbing landscape is like out there, and the age group. I'm still chuckling in the back of my mind about the senior clubbing. I mean, we are all senior clubbers, but I don't like the sound of that. Don't ever say that again, please. So yeah, younger crowd, receptive to the music.
So you mean the seniors that go to the club?
No, the younger crowd. Now you talk about house dancers, Soulmates. They're 25-year-olds, know their sound.
Kind of mixed. It's actually kind of mixed. I would say that there's like the early 30s, and then there's a big gap, and then there's like my age people who go
standing on the side, pretending to uprock.
No, they still dance a little bit, but it's they're a tight community. They're not a big community. They're not the popular, in Stockholm, I would say like the biggest sound. There's a label with some of the DJs connected, which is Studio Barnhus, which is Axel Boman and Cornel Kovacs. I don't know if you know about them, but they play in Berlin and all these. They're more of the current house scene. They do good house music, but they're not the soulful sound. Even though they actually do some good records, but they are like a million times bigger than local talk is in Stockholm. We're more known with the DJs, and we're probably a lot bigger abroad than we are in Stockholm.
I was going to say, any plans to get back to the Far East?
I would love to go there to meet up with some of my friends there, yeah, but I'm not so sure if I want to go DJing. It's not super, super important. I love DJing, don't get me wrong, but it's not as important to me.
Let me ask you about that. Let me poke you a little bit more about that, because I completely relate. Someone who's stopped DJing a long time ago now. Was it you just didn't connect with the people? I mean, pandemic aside and not being able to travel, whatever. Was it once that momentum left, it was difficult to get it back again, or do you think it's just a thing about getting older?
Well, yeah, maybe a bit comfortable. Traveling is not as interesting as it was when you. I mean, I've been traveling for 30 years DJing. It takes a toll on you after a while. And then obviously, I mentioned I do my football, which prohibits me to travel on the weekends as much, because I usually have a game or something, and I really, really love coaching football. I think it's it's probably, if I would put them DJing and football coach, probably the football weighs heavier at the moment, but maybe now DJing is coming back. You don't know, you never know.
So are you, I mean, these are things I should know. Are you coaching your son's team, or are you coaching a different team?
No, I started with my son's team when he was young.
And is he still playing? Forgive me.
Oh, my son is 20 years old now, so he stopped maybe a year and a half ago.
Okay.
We watch football together.
Now he's found women.
Sorry, he's what?
No, he's found women.
Of course.
So yeah, so tell me about the coaching very briefly, and then I've got another question about the DJing. So the age that you coach.
It's a team here in Stockholm, in one of the inner city teams, and it's the under 18s that I coach, and the goal is to actually take over the A team with seniors soon.
Mm-hmm. And what is it that you get? It's a daft question, but I'll ask anyway. What is it that you get from coaching them?
I love the whole leadership part of it, to how to make other people perform, to inspire. It's the more you coach, the more you interest. Like, it kind of similar to DJing, like you need to gear them in the right direction, and then you will see results, but you can't push it too hard. It's a subtle thing, and you have to. The process takes time. It's like I say, if you're DJing and you just play hits, it will have a quick effect in the beginning, but then the only way is down. You need to bump, and when you get that vibe, when the same thing with coaching, you need to take care of the process and take care of the people you're working with, and then you'll see the big bangs will come.
Mm-hmm. So it's very rewarding for you to do that.
I love it.
The competitive streak is still there as well. I was useless as a football dad. I was just screaming on the sideline every weekend, "You're doing it wrong." I would stop going.
I would probably be the coach that go up to you and tell you, "Shut the fuck up, let him play."
Yeah. I had to stop going watching my son play football after a while because I wasn't very good at all. Okay, so where are we at with releases on Local Talk? Are you still enjoying discovering the new artist? What is the A&R process like? All of that, and today, where are we at?
We get sent an insane amount of demos. It's luckily the address where it goes to is to my partner Tooli, so he's the filter. So when it's like he can send, okay, I think these two might actually work, and then we'll have a listen to them. But I would probably say that the most stuff that we sign is when we ask people, hey, like people we know, hey, do you want to do a release for Local Talk? And
okay.
And probably the best stuff is also come around that way. There are always
exceptions. Because you strike me as not being, other labels I've spoken to, other label bosses, they've said your social media game's got to be on point. You've got to have a finished product. You yourself have got to be 90% there before we will even consider taking you on. Whereas you is just like putting the headphones on. This works. We'll worry about the rest after. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it definitely starts with me and Tooli. If we don't feel it, I think we never done like, okay, this wasn't so good, but maybe we can make this work. I think we never signed anything like that. It's like, if we don't like it, it doesn't come on Local Talk. So that's probably, hopefully you can hear it in the music, even though we're quite diverse. But I think it's also beneficial to the artist that he knows that if it's on Local Talk, we like it. It's not something that we're using for money or whatever. It's because we actually like it. Uh-huh. So it's a hard project.
Yeah. What is the release schedule like at the moment? Do you have a set kind of calendar where you need to be releasing X amount of months?
No, we don't have to. Like, actually, now there's a lot of releases coming because we've been working up during the summer. But sometimes it could be because vinyl is such a tricky business. A lot of people go to Local Talk because we also release vinyl still. We do it. In the future, we're probably not going to do it as much because it's basically, if you're a vinyl only label, then you sell vinyl. But if you're a vinyl label, sometimes it's tricky. So, and there's more money in streaming and downloads. We make the most of our money in streaming, not in downloads or in vinyl.
Mm-hmm. And merchandise, because as you say, with a great logo, a great energy behind the content that you put out there, your Bandcamp page, people can find a lot of content on there. And how often are you updating the merchandise?
Funnily as we just uploaded some new Japanese T-shirts, some that are up now, and some other merch, some caps and some beanies and stuff like this that we put up. But once again, that's not our main thing. It's the music that is our main thing. And then you can, if you compare to some of the other labels that are in our sphere, like Free Range or I mean, I still think we're a little bit still, to me, it feels like we're still always a little bit under the radar, which I kind of like. Like I think among people like you and the heads, we're well known. But if you go let's compare us, for example, to Toy Tonics. They're a much commercially bigger label because they do parties and they do what we did in the beginning. They push their logo. I mean, which is really nice. But on the other hand, their sound is a little bit more white. Maybe we're try to be a bit more blackish. It sounds weird coming from me in Sweden, but it's like I think it has to do with heritage. You know, like I come from hip hop and soul and funk. That's my root. You know, so I wish that you hear that in our music, and we would probably not do it. You know, like a punk disco house record. You know, it wouldn't work on Local Talk. We try to have some kind of soulfulness somewhere in there.
Yeah, well, that definitely comes across, and I know a lot of people who do hold you and the label in high esteem, and will completely back the authenticity of what it is that you do, and I think it comes across really well. So, you know, as we start to wrap this up, as I know it's probably getting a darker for you now, is there anything that we should focus on before we start to talk about the latest projects? Anything that we might have missed in my ignorance in this conversation that I haven't spoken about that you expected me to mention?
No, I think we covered it pretty well, actually. It's I think we're pretty. You did a good job.
We kind of like got a few of the timestamps through the timeline. There's a massive.
Probably going to be like this back and forth, but that's okay.
Well, that's all good. That's how I like these conversations, to be quite natural. You know, and as I said to you earlier, I was quite late getting on the Mad Matt's train, but then as soon as I saw you, I was just like, wow, you caught my attention. And I'm fairly certain that's been the same for a lot of people down the years. I actually shocked myself how long, you know, I've been supporting the label now, relatively in your own personal timeline, not from the very beginning, but it was pretty much at the start of Local Talk that I was on board, you know, representing. And it continues to strive, and everyone, and because you're such a great guy, I can only speak from my own experience, how you get on with everyone when you've come over to Spain, and all the guys, you know, take you out for dinner. They love being around you. I'm sure that's the same way you're received around the world, right?
I hope so, but I mean, this community is so small, and I think there's no room for egos, and it's very rare, seldom that I'm met egos in this, even in my long career. Most people are super friendly, and they understand that we're all in this together, you know, and especially when you come to places like Vocal Booth, or even if you go to Southport, that whole community, everyone is very inviting and friendly. I mean, I wouldn't lie when I say that probably my favorite people are the British community. They're very funny people.
Welcoming. They're very welcoming. I love
going to all these soulful events and meeting people around my age, and you know, they're not stiff Swedish guys. They're like they're funny. Senior
British. So if I was to suggest that you come and join us in Spain at some point in the future, you'd be up for that?
Yeah, of course.
Definitely. Well, that's a conversation.
That little small room that we did last time, that was beautiful. Yeah. Love that.
Okay, well, we're in a different location now, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, Matt, so I think we have covered a lot of what I intended to cover. Thank you for giving me some of your time this evening. It's been fantastic. And just confirm the Bandcamp address where people should go.
It's I think it's Bandcamp.localtalk.
And the record label is The Local Talk. right?
Yeah, it's actually, if you put in thelocaltalk.com, you will get to our Bandcamp page.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'm just going to say a few words to everyone, and I'll press a button and it will unceremoniously kick you out of Zoom. So thank you for your time, my friend. Take care. And there we go. We had a great conversation. I can stop listening to myself now in my ears. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. Nice to see you listening intently. I was happy to represent my local talk, Vocal Booth Weekender Takeover. It's gone clean out of my head what year this was now, but what a fantastic night that was. I'm fairly certain you're all subscribed to the channel. If you aren't, then please do subscribe. Be sure to give this video a like. It does help me get into the line of sight of a lot more people. Thank you to all you guys in the chat, and thank you to everyone coming back and checking out the recordings. I think I am like one subscriber away from 1,500. It's a vanity number, but it still shows that we are increasing. Thank you so much. As I bid you farewell, I want to say a massive shout out to all of my Access crew. You can see them here. I'm going to be having a new push to get more people to support the stream on a monthly basis. You see the names scrolling along as we are live every week. You can get your name on the streams, and it's not only every week. Your names, your logos will feature long into the future as well. And if you need any websites or any graphics, then you know I am your man, and I'll be back next week. Take care now. Respect.